Welcome to Module 14.1 Introduction to Rational Expressions. So, what is so called a rational expression? Is basically an algebraic expression that can be written in the form of P over Q, where P and Q are polynomials. So, in other words, when we write as a P over Q, it's like we are writing them in fraction form where the numerator and the denominators are polynomials. So in this lecture video, I'm going to show you something called determine any restriction on the variable in a rational expression. So the word rational, sometimes I simply say it's a fraction. Okay, it's a fraction expression where the numerator and the denominator are considered as are using polynomials. So normally, the rule of thumb that I show students is if you have an expression like 4x plus 1 over 3, that is actually not considered as a rational expression because this is actually 4x over 3 plus 1/3, which is actually considered as a linear because linear means variable is to the first power. So to be considered as a rational expression, the denominator got to have some sort of variable with it. So if I have a 4x plus 1 over 3x, then that can be considered as a rational expression. Okay? So, if as you can recall, if the denominator of a fraction is equal to 0, then the entire fraction is undefined. Okay, denominator can never be equal to 0. So what we're going to do in this particular objective is to find the number for x or any variable that will not make the denominator equal to 0, and that is called the restriction. Okay, that's called a restriction. So for example, I have this rational expression 4x squared over 3x plus 3. I know my denominator cannot equal to 0. So we set the denominator not equal to 0. And we're going to solve for x, see what that number is. So let's move my positive 3 over to the other side. So that gives me 3x equal to negative 3, or not equal to negative 3. So divide both sides by 3, x cannot equal to negative 1. Okay, so that will be my restrictions, where my x cannot be, because if x is negative 1, then 3 times negative 1 plus 3 will make my whole denominator equal to 0. Then my whole entire rational expression will become undefined. Okay, so what number for x that will make my whole entire fraction to be undefined? Negative 1 would. So that means x cannot be negative 1. All right, so basically all we do is set the denominator equal to 0 and solve for the x, so we know what x cannot be. All right, so same thing right here, set 6x squared minus 4x not equal to 0. So now this is actually considered as a quadratic equation. So from module, I believe it was in module 13. I believe it was module 13 where we learned how to solve quadratic equation by factoring. Let's see, 9 is linear, 10 is graphing, 11 is polynomial, 12. Maybe it was 12. It's either 12 or module 13. I cannot quite remember. Where we actually solved the linear, no, it was module 12, where we solved the where we learn how to do all the factoring of polynomials, especially trinomials. All right, so when we solve quadratic equation, the easiest way is by factoring. So between these two terms, I can actually factor out a 2x. So what will be left, my greatest common factor is 2x, so what's left is 3x minus 2 cannot equal to 0. Now we set each factor, all right, we set each factor that contain x, or the variable, not equal to 0. So 2x cannot equal to 0. Divide both sides by 2. My x cannot be 0. Set my the other factor not equal to 0. Move the positive 2 over. That's 3x cannot equal to 2. Divide both sides by 3. X cannot equal to 2/3. So these two are my restrictions. These restriction in Math 110 or college algebra is actually called the restriction on the domain. Okay, so right now we're just learning the very basic concept of just call them restrictions for right now. Okay, so if x equal to 0 and if x equal to 2/3, then the whole denominator becomes 0. Therefore, the whole entire rational expression becomes undefined. All right, let's try another one. So this is, again, set the denominator not equal to 0. So basically, I'm solving for another quadratic equation. I know it's called quadratic equation because my exponent is to the second power. So this is a regular trinomial, so let's factor this. As you can recall, when we factor trinomial, find all the factor that makes my first term, which is 1 and 1, or x and x. Then we're going to find all the factor of my last term, 12. I'm going to use 3 and 4 and put on the back side here. All right, since my outer is 4, inner is 3, 4 and 3 combined will give me a 1 if I would subtract. All right. So since the last sign is negative, my choice for the sign is 1 positive, 1 negative. To end up with a positive 1 in the middle, I got to have a positive 4 on the outer and a negative 3 in the inner. All right, set each factor that containing the variable not equal to 0. My answer, x cannot equal to 3, and the other x cannot equal to negative 4. So those are my restrictions. We will need the restrictions later on when we begin to solve rational equations. Okay, equation that involving with all these rational expressions. Then the restriction, we definitely got to use the restriction then. Oh, this is a good one. All right, let's try again. X squared minus 81 cannot equal to 0, right? So if you look at this x squared minus 81, as you can recall, this is a difference of squares. So for difference of square, that would just be x plus 9 times x minus 9, not equal to 0. All right. So set each factor containing a variable not equal to 0 in this case. So one of my x cannot equal to negative 9. The other x cannot equal to positive 9. Just move the negative 9 over. The other x cannot be positive 9. So my restriction will be negative 9 and 9. All right. So just a quick, this video, just a quick lesson on the restrictions, okay, for the rational expressions, and also explaining exactly what the rational expressions are. They are simply a fraction where the numerator and the denominators are polynomials. All right, that will conclude this lecture video. Thank you for watching.